Jason Pack, and this is Disorder, the show where we say trick or treat. And would you like spooky Trump or visionless Harris? To celebrate Halloween, I was a guest on the Keen On Show, hosted by friend of Disorder, Andrew Keen. We talked about the spooky election in America and how conspiracy theories are really spooky because they allow people to articulate things that wouldn't be politically correct or wouldn't be socially acceptable to articulate directly. I've been studying this phenomenon, and I have an article in the New European, which I'm going to have in the Substack and which I give the link to in the show notes, where I explain that the meta message behind all these conspiracy theories that connect to Trump's electorate is an us versus them turn in American political life. But we also talked about how Brits and foreigners in Europe in general look at the US election, how Americans are increasingly orientalized and seen as other and strange and crazy and spooky in a way. So it's a very Halloween episode. And without further ado, let's cut over to my discussion with Andrew Keen.
Hello, everybody. Happy Halloween, October the 31st, 2024. And it's a special Halloween and a special Halloween show with my old friend Jason Pack from the Disorder podcast. Of course, with the election coming up, Halloween isn't just fictional. It seems to have come to life in America. Jason is joining us from North London. So trick or treat, Jason, I'm assuming that the treat is Harris and the trick is a certain Donald Trump. Is that fair? Is that how you're seeing the election?
It would appear that inside his candy apple, there are some razors. And they have let the kids...
the other way. Inside his razors, there might be a tiny bit of candy apple.
He's let the kids know that if they're Hispanic, if they happen to come from Puerto Rico, if they're Black, then you know what? We have the razors right on the outside of the apple. We say Puerto Rico is a garbage island. Could you imagine? You know, that this is a place where no fewer than 4 million American citizens have their ancestry. And a major candidate of a political party says in Madison Square Garden through a proxy that he thinks it's a garbage island. And he's openly trolling women and minorities the whole time. It's unbelievable.
And of course, when you criticize, he tells you it's a joke. It's supposed to be funny. It might be funny to them. I don't think it's particularly funny to women or people from Puerto Rico. So, Jason, you're in London, but you're an American in London. You do your Disorder podcast. What's the view of what's happening in the US from London, from Europe?
It's a good question, Andrew. I think that there is something multifaceted here. There is an extent to which, in the UK in particular, people are fascinated with American politics. They see American politics as incredibly important for their lives, and they watch the horse race very closely. Whether I'm at a party with friends who went to Oxford and work in media, or whether I'm just, at a coffee shop and people hear my accent, they say, who's going to win the election? Oh my God, I hear it's close. You work in politics, you have a podcast, tell me who's going to win. So they're very interested in the horse race aspect because there is a sense of like, who are these mystical undecided voters in Pennsylvania and what's going to make them choose one way or the other? And how can we read Nate Silver to understand the overcorrection biases and who are the people who are going to swing based on the abortion issue? So the horse race aspect is very important. From a Orientalism perspective, I would say that Brits and continental Europeans even more so orientalize those funny Americans. They may be wealthy, but they're all country bumpkins. Do you know what I mean? Like, look at how stupid their elections are and the dumb issues that they're still debating. We in more advanced societies that have single payer healthcare and have the right of abortion guaranteed and all that, we would never stoop so low as to be having.
It's interesting, Jason, you use the word orientalize. Of course, that was a word popularized by Edward Said. I'm not sure he imagined the United States to be part of what he saw as the Orient. But are you suggesting that for Western Europeans, America's no different from Turkey or the Middle East or East Asia?
In a way, I'm saying that they other it. I remember back in 2017, British friends being like, oh, well, you might just have a second civil war. And this is like, well, they are kind of savages over there. We heard you have all these school shootings and everyone has an AR-15. So you might just descend into a second civil war. I mean, there is an othering despite our shared cultural traditions and frequently being of similar ethnic origins. But it's like, oh, those silly Americans. So I would say I get that a lot, which is like, oh, what are those silly Americans up to with their MAGA rallies? So I would say that that's important in understanding how the election is covered. It's this othering or orientalizing.
How do the Brits, Jason, square that, the silly American notion of civil war and Trump and AR-15s in everyone's pot, with the fact that the American economy is so strong and the British economy is in crisis? It's always in crisis, but in particular crisis, as is Western Europe. So for all the disorder, to borrow your key word, that certainly reflects American politics and perhaps culture, its economy is astonishingly strong.
I think you and I might think of that as a paradox, but the average Western European or Brit doesn't. They think that that is all connected. Those Americans work 80-hour weeks. They allow hedge fund people to have no regulation and the tech firms to do whatever they want. So of course their economy is so strong, but it's strong via a race to the bottom. Elon Musk and Zuckerberg can do whatever they want. So of course they have all the money, whereas we have regulation and we have safeguards. So the money flees from here and it's all either in the States or in Dubai. I don't think that, seen from a more socialist perspective, those things don't make sense together.
You use the socialist word, Jason. I'm not sure everyone would agree with that, but do you agree? I mean, is that the right response? That really, when it comes down to it, for all the supposed quote unquote strength of the US economy, all the money is going to the Zuckerbergs and the Musks. So for ordinary Americans, it actually isn't particularly beneficial.
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I think that Americans have a better standard of living than most Western European countries. Obviously, Norway, Switzerland, Sweden might be exceptions. Americans are more productive per man hour. They work harder and they also spend more. They don't save as much. And we do have some better institutions, like the NHS is very poorly managed and the road network and rail network here is very poor. Obviously, the US may be bad at the road network, but we're quite good at things like getting fiber optic cables and getting business working. So, I mean, there are things in the American entrepreneurial sector that work for everyone. But then there's another phenomenon, which is that if you don't want to pay taxes and you would like to headquarter your company, it doesn't matter if you're from Estonia or South Africa, coming to the US is the place where you have this huge market and you can strike it rich and then you just base yourself in the US and it pulls up the American economy, which is why two of our wealthiest entrepreneurs who are now huge Republican donors, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, come from the South African white nationalist tradition. South Africa doesn't have a market and an economy where they could make that happen, but they came to the States and they've brought a lot of that bizarre and Randian white nationalism to our politics.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw Simon Cooper from the FT wrote an interesting piece about this. He's also from a South African background, making that point. There are a couple of other Republican tech billionaires also who spent some of their youth in South Africa. Do you think that's true, that that the ideology of the apartheid state is somehow infiltrated or infiltrating America through Thiel and Musk?
To some extent. I mean, we've always had South Africa light in terms of how slavery worked in the South and then Jim Crow laws. But the idea that we, the in-group, should not try to adjust the social barriers and create any kind of affirmative action or any kind of help for the historically disadvantaged group, that's something that the Republican right agrees with. And it so happens that there is an Ayn Randianism of the state is inherently evil, don't help out people who are worse off. And these South African white billionaires are very happy supporting that political cause. But maybe we should root this in the conspiracy theory sense, which is...
Yeah, I want to get... You've got an interesting conspiracy theory piece that just came out. But before we get there, Jason, I want to talk about the election in the context of your excellent Disorder podcast and theory. It's the podcast that orders disorder, and you've spent the last year or two on this very successful podcast making sense of what you call our era of global geopolitical disorder. How does the election next week, how does that fit in to the disorder? Is it something new? Is it a new chapter? Or is it just another version of Brexit and the Trump elections of 2016 and 2020?
Well, it's those phenomenon on hypercharge, but I would say that from 2011 to now, it is new, because when the British Empire ruled the roost from, say, 1815 to World War I, or when America had cemented its dominance from the end of World War II until 2003, you didn't await every election or every political change thinking that there was going to be a huge reversal. Like, oh my God, all of a sudden, the funding that we've been giving to Ukraine so that they don't lose to Russia might dry up, or the policies that we're pursuing towards China might change, or they might impose tariffs that are going to, cripple our manufacturing sector and change how the Chinese, export their EVs and solar panels. That's very disordering because it doesn't allow businesses to plan. It doesn't allow people to make rational decisions, because they're having to wonder that everything is going to pivot and go in reverse direction. That's the very nature of the enduring disorder, which is that we're not able to plan for coherent, mutually beneficial outcomes, say on climate change, say on taxes, say on policy towards Putin, because if one person wins the election, they're going to approach it totally differently than if another does. And every business or our allied nations like Britain or Middle Eastern countries that we work with, like Egypt and Israel and the UAE, they can't plan because they're going to have completely different approaches depending on who wins. So yes, that epitomizes the enduring disorder.
Seems to me, and please, I know you're not shy, correct me if I'm wrong. There are what's happening in this upcoming election is, on the one hand, you have Trump promising stuff that is literally, I think, impossible, boasting about doing things which my sense is it's impossible to do, and he certainly won't have the political capital or the organization or the focus to do it. But the idea perhaps is attractive. He certainly is going to get the vote of almost 100 million Americans, whether he wins or loses the election. And on the other hand, you have Harris, who is terrified of her own shadow, who is quite incapable of articulating any vision of the future, who's deeply conservative, who doesn't actually say it, but implies that everything in America is pretty rosy and that the Biden regime has done a good job and she's going to keep things as they are. Is this weird dissymmetry between Harris and Trump, is that a feature of a disordered world?
Yes, and that was really well sketched there, because it's the same between the establishment parties in France, say Macron, as opposed to the Relais National, and the same in a place like Germany between Olaf Scholz and the AfD. The establishment elites say essentially, look, the economy is good and we're winning and we're helping the Ukrainians, but they can't articulate the big way that they're going to create jobs or how they're going to tackle what the electorate perceives as the immigration crisis. And then on the hard neo-populist right, they have mystical solutions. We're going to deport 25 million illegal aliens. We're going to, exit the EU and create these jobs and do whatever. And of course, none of those solutions are implementable. Trump never built the wall, and he can't deport 20 million illegal aliens because we don't have the institutional capacity to do that. And you can't just, dispatch the army on protesters and illegal aliens inside America. So if, God forbid, Harris loses the election, it will be on the establishment and their inability to articulate a vision. And in other words, where is her vision about green jobs, about national service, about the digital economy? She's essentially saying, as you pointed out, things are mostly good and you don't want to elect this fascist, rather than coming up with her own bold solutions like, I'm going to use this amount of money to create these green jobs, and we're going to have, free internet in every school, and we're going to have these fiber optic cables. I mean, she just isn't able to have these risky proposals.
Yeah, and the really surreal thing about Harris is that the Biden administration, for better or worse, has invested trillions of dollars in this new economy. I did a show with the president of a major technology university a few weeks ago, who talked about the massive investment in chip manufacturers in upstate New York. These are the arguments that she should be making, but because maybe her advisors are terrified of being too closely associated with Biden, they're unwilling to even acknowledge the victories of the Biden administration. They're unwilling to embrace tomorrow. It's very, very odd. Whereas Trump isn't shy to, of course, embrace yesterday.
Very well said. And I'm afraid that it's the Hillary Clinton mistake. If you recall, Hillary didn't want to stick her neck out because she's like, we're winning in the polls. We don't want to take any risks. She famously didn't say that she was sick and had the flu, and then she fell out of her limo. And she tried to apologize and say, oh, I actually was sick, but I didn't want to tell anyone. And it was just a bad look, their conservatism. And I think Harris is mostly doing the same because her advisors are like, but look, the economy is doing well and inflation is down. But people don't like the Biden legacy. So you shouldn't brag about the fact that the CHIPS Act is the greatest stimulus to our tech economy ever. The Inflation Reduction Act is the greatest piece of climate change legislation any country has ever done. And we're not taking credit, explaining the boldness of this vision. And I think she's the wrong candidate. So she just has the ability to prosecute very well. And if we go back to the Trump-Harris debate, she was great on the attack, explaining that Trump loves every kind of dictator and has committed every felony. But she was very poor at articulating her own vision because she's a public prosecutor. She's not a natural politician or an orator in the way that Obama was. Obama sketched a vision. He gave the hope. And I thought it might have been good to go with someone like a Pete Buttigieg or Gretchen Whitmer, who maybe would have more been able to explain the sandcastle in the sky that America in 2030 might be.
Yeah, I agree. But you talked about Hillary Clinton not being willing to stick her neck out. Jason, you're a good historian. You know what happens to women who stick their necks out in revolutionary times. Is there a female, a gendered component here? And how does that fit into our age of disorder? Marx wrote about class warfare. Lots of other people have talked about generational warfare. But is this election in a disordered world gender warfare between men and women? Obviously, the abortion issue is central too.
It is in a way. I believe that this election in the US differs from all that have come before it in my lifetime and from European elections by being cast on strictly us versus them terms. So although many men will vote for Trump and they do support a woman's right to have an abortion, and certainly if they knocked up their girlfriend when they weren't ready to get married, they would be happy to have an abortion. I would say the us versus them is that a man knows that Trump supports us men, so that even though he might actually want the ability for his girlfriend to be able to have an abortion, he likes the idea that Trump is going to take back control and take back power to men who've lost their power in the economy and in the household. They have to do chores and they don't have the social standing that they once did. And that this us versus them dynamic is important in the whites versus minorities, whereby the whites, as it were, wish to take back control from these uppity minorities. And men feel there are too many women in public life. I don't want to have a female president. Power is something that men should have, and they should be, macho about it. And I would say that this dimension is what Trump appeals to in all the conspiracy theories that surround Republican and neo-populist candidates, from Orban to the Georgian election that's just happened to Brexit, is to appeal to people's us versus them power struggles.
But with young black men, for example, who supposedly, according to the pollsters, who knows how it will turn out on Tuesday, are at least in some ways intrigued by Trump. Sometimes, gender trumps, to use the term race. Is that fair? I mean, are we going to know on Wednesday morning if race or gender or perhaps class is a determining factor in how people vote?
You can read exit polls to determine those things. I'm not an expert at that question, but you're right that more Black and Hispanic men who lack college degrees have become attracted to the macho us versus them, because it's the conspiratorial worldview that underlies neopopulism everywhere. Bill Gates has implanted a microchip in you through the vaccine. George Soros runs the economy and is promoting those liberal protesters and the Palestinians to manipulate the global economy. And even beyond that, there are Jewish space lasers, which have caused the forest fires in California. It's not climate change. And the Democrats rigged the weather so that they could have the North Carolina storms before the election, as Marjorie Taylor Greene has said. These conspiratorial tropes all have as their upshot the idea that you, the listener, have been screwed over. Someone out there is taking what is your rightful position in the world and the economy and giving it to the elites, and they're conspiring against you. So you wish to take back control. And this is a way to appeal to these various gender and racial cleavages in ways that had not been done previously. When Andrew and I come back, we discuss the real meaning of the conspiracy theories around the 2024 election.
You've got a big piece that came out this week on conspiracy, but I wonder, Jason, whether you're falling into maybe even a conspiracy theory that all these people need to do is go to college and they'll be liberated of their delusions. You suggest that if you haven't gone to college, you're more vulnerable to conspiracy theories. I'm not convinced of that. I have to admit that I see the conspiracy in the Democratic camp too, about Trump as a fascist and destroying democracy and all these other things, which I think are just as delusional in some ways as the paranoia on the right.
Whether Trump is a fascist,
do you believe that education is the key to getting rid of delusions?
The argument that Trump is or is not a fascist is not a conspiracy theory. That's not what a conspiracy theory is. A conspiracy theory is an idea that there is a hidden group or individual who is conspiring to violate our prohibitions on fraud and force to manipulate the world to his advantage or her advantage.
Although, yeah, I take your point. Although there's a reading of it that since supposedly Trump has some sneaking admiration for Hitler and his generals, he wants to reimpose Nazi Germany in 2020's America. So there is this sense of
that is German, a conspiracy theory.
Nazi Germany lurking in the background.
That's a conspiracy theory if he is working with certain other forces, be they Elon Musk or the military or people with guns in Montana, to then take away your freedoms. Then it's a conspiracy theory. But my second point is I didn't make up the argument that as people get college degrees, and particularly minorities have college degrees, they support these conspiracy theories about lizard people or Bill Gates implants a microchip with the vaccine. I'm just giving data that scholars like Joe Uzinski, who I had on my Disorder podcast last week, he is the most famous pollster about conspiracy theories. He's at the University of Miami. He sends out these polls, and people who don't have college degrees are more likely to believe in specific conspiracy theories than people without college degrees. And the greatest correlation is that people who believe in one conspiracy theory, like the CIA killed JFK, are more likely to believe in other conspiracy theories like Bill Gates puts a microchip in the vaccine. That conspiracy theories are a kind of religion. Once you believe in a part of it, you're more likely to believe in the rest of it. And therefore, as we've seen a growth in political conspiracy theories, there is a greater susceptibility among those people who believe in them to believing in other conspiracies, like the 2020 election was rigged. If you're likely to believe that, you may also believe that George Soros runs the global economy on behalf of certain nefarious forces to their benefit, or that climate change is a hoax that various investors have come up with so they can charge more for the lithium that they use to make lithium batteries, or some bogus other aspect of a conspiracy. Once you believe a part, you're more likely to believe the others. And that's what the research has shown.
Yeah, although it goes the other way as well. I mean, a lot of people believe that in a conspiracy that somehow the Russians were behind the successful election. Putin was behind the Trump victory in 2016. A few days ago, Jason, I had Peter Osnos, a legendary figure in New York publishing, on the show. He was the original editor of Trump's Art of the Deal. He got to know Donald Trump pretty well.
Wow.
He said at one point he took his young son, Evan Osnos, now who's a very distinguished American journalist, to a big wrestling game. I don't know if it's a wrestling match, wrestling game, where Trump was somehow participating. He wasn't a wrestler. I guess he was the promoter. And Trump was enormously popular. I wonder whether wrestling itself and this kind of fake violence has become a central feature in American politics. And that explains all these bizarre conspiracy theories that people don't actually believe it's true. In the same way as they don't believe that in the wrestling ring, fighters literally kill each other. But at the same time, they enjoy the spectacle. So to what extent do followers of conspiracy theories actually believe it, rather than just see it as an offshoot of reality television, of reality fantasy?
This is a great question, Andrew. And this is exactly what my New European article, which we'll have in a link to the show notes, is about. I think that you need to read conspiracy theories across the grain, in that they have a double truth theorem about them. The majority of Americans who say that they think the 2020 election was rigged, I don't believe they mean it was literally rigged. And we're getting from polling that 1/3 of all registered Republicans do say that they think the 2020 election was rigged. So we're talking about 30 million people. When they say that to pollsters, I believe they don't think, oh, 1 million illegal aliens actually casted ballots and that's why Biden won, or the election machines were disabled by Chinese robots so that Biden could win. They may say it was rigged in the sense that I don't believe that Blacks or Hispanics or Jews or newly naturalized Americans should have the same vote and the same power in society as me and my friends when we are white Christians whose great-grandparents were all born in this country. So to them, who is unpacking the conspiracy theory, yes, the election was rigged. It was stolen because those other people shouldn't have an equal vote to my group. My friends all support Trump, so the election was stolen from us. And this is a very, very unadvanced way of understanding what people mean when they say the election was rigged. And we can analyze other things about, like, well, Bill Gates puts microchips in the vaccine. People may know that Bill Gates has not put a microchip in the vaccine, but they dislike that tech billionaires have so much power and that the government and private corporations can get so much information about you because you voluntarily give all this information to Facebook and on your smartphone and whatever. So if you're a libertarian, you don't love the fact that the big tech firms have so much information about you. So you don't believe that Bill Gates literally puts a microchip in a tiny vaccine chip, but you think in the world, there is a way in which there is like a microchip in your body because you are being spied on through your phone. And this is what I would call the Maimonidean reading of these conspiracy theories. And it's happening all the time. And it explains how people unpack the inner meaning of the conspiracy theory from their perspective.
I wonder, going back to a Jewish philosopher, a Jewish theologian, I wonder whether this has always been a feature of particularly of American politics, of a religious society, politicians boast of their religion, of their Christianity, which is also a childish conspiracy theory about the world. What's the difference between conventional religion and its iconography and theories about, I don't know, Gates and microchips or George Soros or for Putin or any of this other nonsense?
That's another great question, because I would argue Christianity in particular, but religion in general, is about symbolic unpacking beyond literal truths. So I mentioned Maimonides, but I'm using Maimonides in his understanding of Ibn Rushd, who's known in Latin as Averroes.
The great Islamic philosopher of history.
Correct. And the Islamic philosopher that I mentioned, Ibn Rushd, understands that double truth theorem means that a given important religious statement can be literally true to the masses who don't have an education, but it's symbolically true to the philosopher who knows that the thing is not literally true. So if you look at Christianity, a virgin conceived, or, for example, Jesus has two natures, a divine nature and a human nature, and the so-called monophysite aspect, that he has one nature. You need to unpack the meaning of that for how you understand life. It's not a question so much of, did a virgin actually conceive? It's structurally, what does it mean for society and how we look at purity if we believe this?
It's like the old debates on the left amongst the Marxists about whether or not the revolution will happen before or after capitalism. Then is it perhaps more than coincidental, Jason, that some of the hardcore conspiracy theorists are themselves embracing conspiracy theory religion, like Roman Catholicism, J.D. Vance in particular, and his embrace, not literally, of course, but symbolically, of priests?
I'm going to go back to Joe Uzinski, who I had on my podcast last week. He says the more you believe in any given thing, the more likely you are to believe in other things. So if you're a hardcore believer in Roman Catholicism or any other religion, it's easier for you to then believe in whatever the given conspiracy theory is, like the CIA killed JFK, because it requires the same part of your brain to suspend disbelief. You know that it's not really possible for a virgin to conceive. We all know this. And you also know it's not possible for the vaccine, which is in this tiny needle, to have a microchip implanted in it, and then that monitors all your movements. But you suspend disbelief in the same way for religious beliefs as you do for conspiratorial beliefs, on the one hand. And on the other, you need the same symbolic unpacking, whereby in religion, you can unpack the virgin conceived Jesus to understand about the purity of Mary and the purity of Jesus on earth, as well as you can unpack the meaning of the 2020 election was stolen. You know that means that Hispanics and Blacks and others shouldn't have the same political representation as you, a God-fearing white Christian. So it requires a similar belief system to unpack these different ways of thinking.
We'll have to get Zizek on the show to talk about unpacking the virgin. Jason, what becomes of secular boys like you and I from Hampstead Garden suburb who haven't fallen for the virgin?
Great question. I do have some beliefs. I believe in the Constitution, and I believe in our secular religions like Thanksgiving and American football. And what becomes of us is I want to go back to a simpler time where we assimilated into the same symbols, and we could get along with believers of different faiths so long as we agreed on the Constitution and Thanksgiving and supporting the Eagles or the Redskins, as they used to be called. So I guess I am really a believer in America and a believer in Western openness and democracy and things like that. So what will happen if Trump wins? I fear that we will be descending into an us versus them war, whereby someone like me, who's in the center of things, because I'm an American patriot and I'm socially conservative in many ways, I won't have a place in political life.
This is where I have to strongly disagree with you, Jason. Firstly, whoever wins, and it's very hard to tell, obviously. My guess is Trump will win. I'm intrigued at this point to hear who you think will win. But whoever wins, America will be just as divided on Wednesday as it was on Tuesday or Monday.
It's not about that. It's about his ability to do what Orban or now Georgia Dream Party and Ivanishvili have done, which is to take a former democracy, gradually eviscerate its institutions, to destroy its ability to self-regulate, appoint more Supreme Court judges. If we have 7 out of 9 who are Republican MAGA nutcases on the court, the ability to have checks and balances just disappears. And therefore, it doesn't matter that America would be as divided if Harris wins or if Trump. Harris is not going to be doing a judicial coup to destroy the checks and balances of American society. I believe the whole Trump project is really only about the judicial coup and low taxes. It's not about any of this bullshit about, oh, we're going to send back the immigrants, or, we do or do not believe in this about transgendered. That's not what the billionaires who fund the project care about. It's merely about the judicial coup and destroying our institutions.
Why is it a judicial coup?
Because
you use this word coup. It sounds like conspiracy theory. These were legally appointed judges.
Incorrect. That's not true. They stole Merrick Garland's seat. It's a complete coup. There is no precedent that the Senate can block.
Well, it was a political coup, but it was a one that wasn't, it wasn't on the back of stormtroopers and end the Supreme Court. It just again reflects the political naivety of the Democrats rather than anything else.
But that's the judicial coup, which is that Trump's project is to break down the institutions of the checks and balances of our Constitution. And he's going to be succeeding if he wins. I'm here in Hampstead because I cannot live in America on November 7th if, Trump has just won on November 6th. I have moved my assets and I'm getting my British citizenship because I want to have a career where I can speak my mind and I can influence policy. They no longer believe in experts, Andrew. If you're the expert on Libya or on sovereign wealth funds in the Gulf, you're not going to be able to influence Trumpian policy because it's the cousin of so-and-so who gets to have that role now. It's all venal. They don't believe in having true experts funnel in information about this kind of stuff anymore.
So it's going to be the victory of what? Decadence over vitality, Jason, if Trump wins?
Well, he and his people do have some vitality, and we in the centrist establishment do have some decadence. And I plead guilty as charged for our side in not articulating bold visions. I just think of neo-populism. He doesn't care to have functioning institutions. They're not running from a John McCain or even W. Bush Republican Party, which is like an ideological position about less taxes and more neocon interventions abroad. They merely want to break down the machine of constitutional governance.
So should I stay, Jason, or is my show going to be made illegal? I'm no great fan of these people.
I think that you're old enough that it will not necessarily be directly affecting you.
Are you being an ageist now, Jason, suggesting that the old will survive and young men like you need to leave the country?
Yes, that is what I'm suggesting.
Well, Jason Pack, old friend of the show, host of the excellent Disorder podcast, which I assume will go on whoever wins the election. Finally, Jason, who is going to win? We're talking on Halloween, so nobody knows yet. As I said, my prediction is Trump. What's yours?
I think Trump has a 54% chance of winning.
Who's going to win? No 54%.
No,
yes
I believe Harris will win the popular vote, and I stand by that prediction. I have a lot of what I call political investing on this question. So I feel very confident in Harris taking the popular vote, despite some of the polls saying now that she's in trouble there. The Electoral College is a coin toss. No one themselves who is involved, neither Trump nor his campaign managers, nor Harris or her campaign managers, knows what's going to happen in Michigan or Pennsylvania.
This is a Harris response. I asked you a simple question, Jason. Who's going to win, Trump or Harris?
I think that Trump is favorite. Again, I can't predict. I think that he's the favorite.
I wouldn't say I hope he
I'm
wins,
making
but
a
I know
real
if he does
prediction.
win, we're going to have lots of interesting conversations in the future. Although, of course, even if Harris wins, that doesn't mark the end of our
No,
age of
she's a very
disorder,
I
does
want
it?
to just say this, Andrew. She's a very flawed candidate. She's not who I would chosen. I have no emotional connection to her. And I don't think that she's a good orator or she's able to articulate a vision of America. I'm only an anti-Trump voter. I'm not a pro-Harris voter. I just want to be very clear there.
Well, Jason Pack, host of the Disorder podcast. Always a pleasure, Jason, talking. And we will talk again. Whoever wins next week, there'll be lots to discuss. Keep well, keep safe, and we'll talk again in the not too distant future. Thank you so much.
Thanks as always, Andrew. Hey, mega orderers, you're back with just me. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Andrew Keen in the lead up to this very spooky election cycle, making this really the most terrifying Halloween of my life. I am not as definitive that the result is going to turn against us as Andrew was, but I am genuinely terrified. And I am just praying and hoping that we can wake up Wednesday morning and have hope for more order and more coordination between the US and its European and British and East Asian allies. What a scary time. So I hope you enjoy your trick-or-treating, and I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, please check out the show notes where I'm going to feature that new European article. It's really a funny and satirical take on how conspiracy theories work. And check that out by following the link to the Substack in the show notes. As always, our producer is the one, the only, the George McDonough. Our executive producer is Neil Fern. And as always, I am wishing you an orderly week, maybe with a little bit of spookiness and trick-or-treat, but without metaphysical worries that I, your podcaster, face about November 5th. We're going to have an episode on how to predict the future and how to prepare for various futures. And then on November 7th, we are going to survey the damage and look at what lies ahead. I hope you join us then. And until then, be well.